Patriots Daily is brought to you by FanDuel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
What's going on, everyone? It's Taylor Cowles here for CLNS Media. And with the Patriots kicking off the preseason on Thursday against the Texans, figured it was a pretty good time for a roster projection. Now, I've been trying really hard to get these rosters down to 53 people. I've had a ton of different versions. I thought I was set, but I had a conversation with our guest today, and he had me rethinking my entire strategy. And instead of keeping those valuable lessons to myself, I figured, why not share with our beautiful audience? So today we're joined by another member of the CLNS Media family, Alex Barth of 98.5 The Sports Hub and the Catch 22 podcast on Patriots.com, which I listen to religiously. Highly recommend. Alex, how we doing, buddy?
Good. This is fun. A little training camp, home and home, a little joint practice. I loved having you on the Sports Hub Patriots podcast earlier in camp. That's still one of our most downloaded episodes so far to this point in camp. And hopefully we can beat those numbers here.
Hey, we'll see what happens, buddy. I had a good time. Hopefully I can be as great a host to you as you were to me. And that starts with being sensitive to your time. So let's get things started off. First position, obviously we got to start with quarterback. Now, you had a fantastic article where you detailed all the positions. Now, with quarterback, actually, something has changed since you wrote it. Originally, Malik Cunningham was really just a receiver, but now we're starting to see more snaps from him at quarterback. So you had Mac Jones, Bailey Zappi. What are you thinking of that position right now? And also, what are your thoughts on Trace McSorley and where he could end up on the roster?
I still think it's Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi on the roster, and that's it. They've got too much depth at other positions. They've got too much need for depth at other positions to fool around with the third quarterback, especially when I think between Cunningham or McSorley, they can get one of those guys on the practice squad. And to me, that's everybody wants the quarterback competition in Patriots training camp. Well, here we go. We have a quarterback competition for the third spot, for the training camp spot, for the scout team quarterback spot between Malik Cunningham and Trace McSorley. They need that athletic, mobile option passer to help prepare them for some of these more athletic new age quarterbacks they're going to face. Right away off the bat, Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, Malik Cunningham and Trace McSorley, neither of them are either of those quarterbacks, but you need somebody similar stylistically to get you through on the scout team. And I think they signed McSorley as kind of the safe option here. And then, hey, if Malik Cunningham looks like he belongs, great. If not, we know we have McSorley. So I don't think either of them is making the 53. I don't think they're in danger of losing either player, at least not to start the season. So it's just who do they like better on the scout team? And I think Cunningham certainly has an edge there as a project player, as a wide receiver. So it was basically just a matter of, can he show them enough at quarterback that they can trust him to be the scout team quarterback while he develops at wide receiver. So we'll see what that looks like in the preseason game. I think we're going to get to see that this week. We saw it a little bit in practice, but that to me is the battle. It's those two for the practice squad. I would be shocked if you see more than two quarterbacks on the initial 53-man roster.
Completely agree. It feels like with McSorley, you got the veteran, great locker room presence, all that good stuff. Malik Cunningham, you got youth and potential positional versatility. Now, obviously, both guys bring mobility, so it's going to be interesting, as you said, to see how that shakes out in the preseason. Moving on to another part of the backfield, running backs. I feel like this one's pretty straightforward. They got the guys on the roster. They have had some people in for visits. So depending on what happens with Ty Montgomery, we'll see how it ultimately shakes out. But what do you see happening with that position so far? And if, say, Ty Montgomery isn't ready to go for week one, who do you see them potentially bringing in?
Yeah, this one's still this was actually a tough one for me because I think you have a guy like Kevin Harris. They cut him last year. They cut him last year, and he was on the practice squad. They brought him back. Could they do that again? Where are they at with Ty Montgomery? Whether he's healthy or not, do they trust him enough to stay healthy, to give him a roster spot? They've talked about needing to limit Ramondre Stevenson's workload, and they are absolutely correct in needing to do that. No ands, ifs, or buts about it. He cannot be a 300-touch guy again. That's nothing against Ramondre Stevenson. It's not sustainable in the modern NFL. All of these teams that have feature backs, the Titans, the Cowboys until recent years, they all tail off at the end of the year. Why is that? Because their running back so beat up that he can't be the same difference maker he was to start the season. I really don't want to see the Patriots become one of those teams. And I don't want to see Ramondre Stevenson become one of those backs. I want to see him playing his best ball for 17 weeks and hopefully more. So they need another guy to spell him. They don't have a proven option for that right now. So you figure they got to keep multiple candidates, Pierre Strong, Kevin Harris, Ty Montgomery. So I feel like they're going to keep four. I had those four on. the one spot I'm kind of looking at wiggle room again. Could Kevin Harris get released to get somebody on the roster and then brought back? Also, if they were to sign a guy like a Ezekiel Elliott, I think that means that they give up on the Ty Montgomery experiment. As promising as he's looked at times, it's just if the guy can't stay healthy, he's a guy you need to build specific things in your offense for. And if you build it, you spend the time to build those things in, and then he gets hurt, that's wasted time. And it's kind of a crass way to put it, but it's a business, and you can't be wasting time on a player you can't count on. So I do think they keep 4 running backs. I just did which 4 they are after Ramondre Stevenson and one of the draft picks from last year. It could go any number of ways. Like Kevin Harris will be here, and I think he'll be on the 53 by October 1st. But it wouldn't surprise me if they put him on the practice squad right away. It also wouldn't surprise me if they keep both of those guys.
And what do you think of Pierre Strong? Because I feel like Ty Montgomery, the reliable veteran, you know what you're going to get out of him. Obviously, health is a big factor. But Pierre Strong, in terms of the role he'd likely have, I think he's more of a change of pace back. Like, I think Ty Montgomery is a true third down guy. You really don't want to give him a ton of carries. But Pierre Strong is like, okay, he's got some positional versatility. You might be able to use him downfield. You know, I don't know how extensive his route tree is yet. We really don't know. But we saw last year against the Bills in that last game of the season on the interception that Mac threw to Nelson Aguilar, Pierre Strong was running a seam and he was open, also a concept we saw in college. So what have you seen from him in camp, and how strong of a case does he have for the roster?
So him and Kevin Harris are kind of in the same boat for me. They haven't been bad. They haven't been bad, but they haven't been good. They've just kind of been there. Yeah. And for a third or fourth back, that's good. If you're talking about a second back, like neither of them have been up to the level that Damian Harris was at, and that's the role you're trying to fill. So there are still a ways to go. And I think part of the reason the Patriots haven't signed a running back is because everybody's waiting for Dalvin Cook to sign. And they want the market to be set. Guys like Ezekiel Elliott, guys like Leonard Fournette, they want the market to be set before they sign. The other reason I think maybe the Patriots haven't been as aggressive is they don't need that running back right now. They need a second back for week 1 of the regular season. They don't, we'll say like a week or 2 before, just to get accustomed to the offense and get ready to go. But right now, I don't think there's a need to have that guy on the roster, especially if you're planning on bringing in an experienced veteran like Elliott or Fournette. So why take up reps from Strong and Harris? I think that's what they're doing right now, is they're giving these guys the spotlight. They're giving them the floor to prove what they can do. Joint practices will be big. We really need to see them in pass pro, because that's so big for this team, running backs in pass pro. And I think we'll see a lot of that. They generally do a lot of that stuff in joint practices. But, as it stands right now, I don't know. I'm definitely comfortable with both of them being the third back. I don't know that I'm comfortable with either of them being the second back. I'm not saying they can't get there, but they neither of them have popped. We've had guys that have popped in this camp that, rookies are the obvious examples, guys like Tamario Douglas. But even a guy like Mac Wilson, who's been around, but you're seeing him, his game looks different this summer. He looks better. And we'll get to Mac Wilson in a little bit, I'm sure. But I haven't, how many times have you been there and like, oh, Pierre Strong, oh, Kevin Harris. All right. Like, I just haven't had those moments. Again, they're just they're just sort of there. They haven't been bad. There's no like, uh-oh, Pierre Strong, uh-oh, Kevin Harris. But it's just, they've just kind of been in the background.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because when the running backs get involved, I don't want to go on too much longer about them, but with the runs, like, you're not seeing them. There have been periods where they actually are tackling, but it also feels like it's tough for running backs to really stand out given the nature of these practices.
Yeah.
Where they're trying to keep guys healthy, like especially the screens with the issues on the offensive line. It feels like screens are getting blown up consistently. You're not really getting opportunities for Pierre Strong to show his elusiveness in space. I feel like you do see the burst, but it's usually once, he gets past the second level because no one's really trying to bring him down. And then he's just kind of going there. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that running back position shakes out. Another position where the bottom of it is kind of up for grabs. I wonder what you think about it for wide receivers. Now you've got Kendrick Bourne, Devontae Parker, Juju Smith-Schuster, Demario Douglas, who I'm sure we could talk about at length. I don't think he's a surprise at this point to potentially make the roster. And then Tyquan Thornton. Now, like we said, it seems like Demario Douglas, he's probably going to make the roster. Like, he would have to just fall off a cliff at this point because he's been outstanding. But it feels like that 5th receiver spot might be a pretty significant competition because Kayshon Boutte, has been putting good days together. He was a little more quiet today, but he's been making some pretty outstanding catches and said himself that he's built confidence and feels like he's starting to grow. So what do you think about that position, and how much of a competition do you see? And do you think there's a possibility they keep a sixth receiver? I personally don't, but what do you think?
I don't think they keep a sixth receiver right now. There's essentially two different things going on here simultaneously. And what's complicating all of this is Tyquan Thornton's draft status. Tyquan Thornton's going to make the team because he's the 50th overall pick a year ago. It's too early to give up on him. And some people come back and say, hey, they took Duke Dawson in the second round and traded him after a year. The difference is that team had Steph Gilmore, Jason McCourty, J.C. Jackson. Like, they didn't need – they were set at corner. This team can't give up on any semblance of hope at wide receiver. They just can't afford to do it. So you have two things going on. You have Tyquan Thornton and Demario Douglas battling for that fourth wide receiver spot, 4 and 5. And then you have Kayshon Boutte basically trying to catch Thornton to bump Thornton down to 6 and force them to keep that 6th receiver. The unique thing about Kayshon Boutte, he's not your average 6th-round pick because of his pedigree, top high school recruit, breakout star as a freshman at LSU. If teams see one glimmer of hope from him in the preseason, he's not getting to the practice squad. He's not getting through waivers because they're going to look at it and be like, the Patriots fixed him. And if they don't want to take him, we will. So they almost might get forced into keeping 6 receivers. This gets into a concept I've written about in the past, and I'm going to be writing about probably in a week or two. Again, I do this every year. And Taylor, I know you said you want to get into it. We can get into it whenever you want to, but basically, there are these things called at-large roster spots. And at the end of the day, every team has to keep a certain number of players at each position. So that accounts for 40-ish roster spots, a little over 40. And then you have certain players, like, for instance, the minimum number of wide receivers a team is going to keep is 3. That is like across the league, teams never keep fewer than 3. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but if we're going by the absolute minimum, it's 3. But this team's keeping at least 4 receivers because they're going to keep Thornton. So that takes away another roster spot. Another example is at safety. The minimum at safety is 3. They're definitely keeping at least 4 safeties. They have 4-star safety, like those guys. So you're losing roster spots there. Matthew Slater also doesn't factor into that. He's kind of his own thing. So you keep knocking away these roster spots, and what you end up with when you factor in the positional minimums and the roster locks on top of that is what I call at-large roster spots, which is basically the number of roster spots that can be won by simply being the better player, on the best player available, because there are players who are not among the best 53 who make the team. The backup quarterback usually isn't one of the best 53 players on the team, but he's going to make the team. So that knocks, call it the 53rd best player off the roster. It's like March Madness, how the conference champions knock off some Power 5 teams who might be better, but they weren't good enough relative to their conference. I know I said maybe you want to get into it later, and then I did the whole spiel. Sorry about that. But
no, not at all. Not at all.
The point being, like, Thornton is going to make the roster in addition to Parker, Juju, and Bourne. And we're really getting there with Demario Douglas. So now that's 5. Kayshon Boutte is essentially going to have to win one of those at-large roster spots if he wants to make the team. Like I said, I'm writing this in a couple of weeks. I usually need to see a couple of preseason games to really get the numbers right. But, you know, at-large roster spots on this team, it's going to be under 10. It's probably going to be 5 or 6. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 4. Like, that wouldn't shock me. So can he be one of the 4 best other players on the roster? And I mean, that group goes from, you know, all the tight ends after Henry and Gesicki are in that conversation. You have some defensive linemen, a guy like Daniel Quale, Sam Roberts, Carl Davis are in that conversation. I think Mac Wilson, Anthony Jennings might be in that conversation. Some other rookies, Isaiah Bolden is in there. Amir Speed is in there. Jordan Healig is in there. Like, these are guys that are going for those at-large spots. So Kayshon Boutte has to be one of the 4 or 5 best players of that group. Can he do it? I think he can, but it's going to be a really tight margin. There's not going to be a ton of room for error, and those joint practices are going to be huge in determining that.
I'm glad you did break that down, because I'm the caveman over here going, film good. You had actually broken it down to a science. And I think I just have the mindset. What that is,
you say breaking it down to a science just to kind of add the cap on it. What I just did in that exercise, that's what the bubble is. When we talk about the roster bubble, like, we talk about it as this abstract thing that, like, players who are maybe on the roster, maybe they're not. That is the quantified roster bubble, is the at-large roster spots. These are the guys that don't have a defined role on the team, but are still good enough to make the roster, but there's only so many spots for such players. So it's 10 to 15 guys for 5 spots, and you do the math from there.
Now, I think I undersimplified it with the receivers because in my head, I'm saying at these practices, I'm rooting for Tyquan Thornton. Like, I'm not I want him to show what the team expected from him as that second-round pick. But at the same time, looking at what they've done in training camp, in my head, I'm going, well, Kayshon Boutte has earned a spot so far. Obviously, long way to go still. Tyquan hasn't. So my thing has been, well, Tyquan might catch the little Foxborough flu. And that's where you kind of find a way to finagle where it's like, okay, Kayshon Boutte gets a little bit of time, see what we've really got there, and then see how the roster plays out, because obviously injuries and things like that are an unfortunate part of the game. And then usually that has a pretty big factor in where these spots end up going. And is that really unquantifiable thing where, okay, unfortunately we lose this player for a certain amount of time, but it opens a door for somebody else. And you mentioned the tight. Oh, yes, go on.
Yeah, no. So I just want to say, like, there's always that Foxborough flu element of it. Mm-hmm. But again, how are you Foxborough fluing Tyquan Thornton? Are you going to put him on IR before cut down and lose him for the year? Because at that point, you're not cutting him, but that's everything but. You're waving the white flag on that pick. Yeah. He's losing a year of development. You're moving forward without him. Are you going to try to get him on the 53, then IR him, then bring Kayshon Boutte back? Again, I don't know that Kayshon Boutte's the guy that's getting through waivers. Maybe you do that at another position, and they've done weird things in the past to manipulate this, not keep a backup quarterback initially, not keep a kicker initially. I don't think either of those are options this year, but they can do some weird things with that. But Kayshon Boutte is what makes this so unique, because he is so unique as a 6th-round pick with his ability. Let's say the roles were reversed. And Kayshon Boutte was the guy that was straight up, this dude's amazing. He's clearly an NFL player. Like, and Demario Douglas was the guy that, we need to see a little more, but he's encouraging. Then it would be easy. All right, you waive Demario Douglas, you get him through waivers, you bring him back after Tyquan goes on IR. LSU, borderline All-American, wide receiver. It's like, even if there are warts in his game in the preseason, if he shows enough that you'd be willing to bring him back, somebody's going to roster him on the 53. And then there's just the Patriots' whole history at wide receiver. You can't quit on talent at that position. If they do waive Boutte to keep Tyquan Thornton, and Thornton becomes a bust, and Boutte goes elsewhere and becomes a star, there's no coming back from that for Matt Grove. That is going to be brought up anytime they make a decision at wide receiver. There's no perfect answer here, and they've done this to themselves. The perfect answer is figure it out at wide receiver long before you get to the point where you're counting on 2 6-round picks. Sign DeAndre Hopkins. Draft Christian Watson in the 1st round instead of a guard. Those were the right answers here. But, they are in this really interesting spot where something's going to have to give. If it were me, Tyquan Thornton to IR, as much as I just poo-pooed that, is sounding better and better by the day in just kind of punting on him for the season. There's a long way to go, so we'll see, but I would hate to see them quit on Kayshon Boutte, because I think he's not your typical 6th-round pick. I think he's a guy.
Yeah, I mean, he was touted. It's not like he was a 6th-round pick going into his last year in college. He was considered the best receiver in that draft class entering that season, but then everything changed. And then Tyquan Thornton, like, already people were saying it when he was picked. This feels like a reach because he's a thin guy. Yeah, he's fast, but he's mostly fast. The physicality isn't really a big part of his game. And with Kayshon Boutte, he's a much more well-rounded prospect. So, again, pulling for Tyquan Thornton. But if we see for the rest of this offseason program what we've seen from him for most of it already, then it's a pretty good excuse to be like, all right, we got to take a flyer because we got a guy who we really do feel good about.
So the one other interesting thing in here, and I know you want to keep moving, but this is the position.
This is gold. This is gold. This is why you're here.
And again, this is another one where ideally they're not in this situation, but it's too late. So ideally, even if he's struggling, a guy you used the 50th overall pick on, you put him out there and you want to let him, develop his game in real time. And maybe there's some warts that come with that, but hey, let's just put this guy on the field and let him figure it out. The problem is, they're also doing that with another player on offense, and that's Mac Jones. And ideally, Mac Jones would have figured this all out last year, and he'd be just hitting the ground rolling going to year 3. Well, they made Matt Patricia the offense coordinator, and that wasn't going to happen. So you need to maximize what's around Mac Jones so you can have him at his best and figure out what he is. I don't know that you can simultaneously develop Mac Jones and Tyquan Thornton right now. Because if Tyquan Thornton isn't a guy, if he's not like a capable NFL receiver, you're asking Mac Jones to play 10 on 11, and that's not a full evaluation. It sucks that they kind of have to choose between Mac Jones and Tyquan Thornton. But again, that's a spot they put themselves in. And if that is the choice, I'm sorry, it's a no-brainer. One's a quarterback. That is the position you need to develop. So not great that they put themselves in that situation. That's not like roster building 101. It's not a spot you should be in, but it's where they're at. And it's another element I think you have to factor in. What wide receiver group, capped, cut, IR, whatever, maximizes Mac Jones? And that might be a group without Tyquan Thornton.
Yeah, they dug their grave. They got to live with the consequences, unfortunately. Once again, man, especially because of the dynamic element that Tyquan can bring, if he lives up to what they expected, again, when they chose him with that pick, that's ideal. But as you said, you've got to put your chips in Mac Jones's basket. And if Kayshon Boutte really continues to say, hey, I earned this spot, I'm putting in the work, I'm putting in good film, you're not going to risk putting me on waivers. We'll see what happens. Again, too early, but Boutte's definitely pulling ahead in that race. Now, this is a bit of an easier position to predict. Tight end. You got Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki. No one's going to argue with that. I think the more interesting part is what they do with Matt Sokol and Anthony Firkser. I think those are two guys who are really strong practice squad candidates because Sokol, good inline blocker. We've seen him have some impressive contested catches, not as consistent, but I mean, from somebody who I don't think people were really expecting much, period, he has shown up. And then Firkser's a guy that I thought was a dark horse for the roster because of his positional versatility. You know how much Bill O'Brien loves playing with personnel groupings. Firkser's a guy who could be a fullback. He could be your number 3 receiver inside when they go empty. He can be inline. He can be offline. There's a lot there. And obviously he's bounced around teams, so it's not like he's a guy they have to keep necessarily, but I do think he could be a good chess piece in the, that game that O'Brien likes to play. So, I mean, again, Hunter Henry, Mike Gesicki, that's pretty straightforward. What do you think about those two guys, Sokol and Firkser, and where their potential spots could be?
So I would add in Johnny Lumpkin and Scotty Washington too. I think all 4 tight ends. And what's great about that group behind Henry and Gesicki is you have Matt Sokol, who's kind of just your traditional Y tight end. He can catch a little bit. He can block a little bit. You have Firkser, who kind of like you highlighted there, is more that H-back type. You have Johnny Lumpkin, who's essentially another tackle. And then you have Scotty Washington, who's more like Mike Gesicki, who's almost another, he's a hybrid tight end wide receiver. Yeah. To me, it's a no-brainer. Put those 4 guys on the practice squad, and week by week, as the matchup dictates, whichever skill set you need the most, elevate a guy. And you can elevate all players twice. So if you have 4 tight ends, they each get 2 elevations. That gets you to the end of October. And at that point, roster spot probably opens up. Injuries are a reality. And you figure out which player is the best fit, and you add them to the 53. They should not need to give Matt Sokol a roster spot. Mm-hmm. Yes, there's going to be days they want 3 tight ends active, but this is again where you go to that practice squad elevation rule.
Right.
I don't think they should be able to get all 4 of those guys in the practice squad. Do that, elevate them as needed. There's too much. We just talked. We spent 10 minutes at wide receiver. We still got to get to linebacker. We still got to get to corner. There's too much of a roster crunch elsewhere. I would just leave it at the 2 tight ends and take advantage of the practice squad rules elsewhere.
I do think it's interesting, though, because I couldn't put more than 2 on the practice squad when I was going through my potential projections. Do you think 4 tight ends on the practice squad is too many, or do you think they all really do justify those spots?
So if you ask them, it's not 4 tight ends, and that's why I think they justify it. It's a tight end. Okay. It's an H-back. It's a receiver, and it's
different roles.
Right. Okay. So if it was 4 Matt Sokols, if it was 4 just traditional, vanilla tight ends, no, you're going to keep 1, maybe 2 if you're worried about the health of Henry and Gesicki and move on from there. But I feel like, especially when you get down to the practice squad, what they've done, I've noticed with those practice squad elevation rules, is a lot of players who maybe aren't like great, well-rounded players, but have one elite skill that they know they can exploit in certain matchups. Those are the kind of guys they can keep on the practice squad. So, Sokol, Firkser, Lumpkin, Washington, they all have the same 2 letters next to their name on the roster. Those are 4 guys that bring 4 completely different skill sets. So I don't think they look at those guys as overlap. If there is one guy that overlaps, it's Washington, because his skills, he's not giving you anything Mike Gesicki doesn't. He's more just Mike Gesicki insurance as opposed to another element to your offense. But they kept 2 punters on the practice squad once. They could get weird with it. I would not. Them keeping 4 tight ends, especially the way this offense is built, would not surprise me in the slightest.
Especially with Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki both in the last year of their contracts with the Patriots. It's completely likely that they end up going elsewhere if they don't get extended or re-signed or whatever. And then you got a big need. 4 bodies who already have experience in the system could be a huge advantage. So moving on to the offensive line, you got David Andrews, obvious, Trent Brown, Mike Nwenu, Riley Reef, Sidney So, Cole Strange, Antonio Mafi, and Jake Andrews. Now, you mentioned that the Patriots are usually pretty light on the offensive line when it comes to cutdown days, but having drafted 3 offensive linemen, and obviously with the depth concerns they have, especially at offensive tackle, they're going to need more bodies at that position. So how did you come to who you ended up putting on your projection? And in terms of the guys that you left out, what did you think was a determining factor there? And who do you think ends up on the practice squad? Like Stuber and Chase and Hines, are they some guys who you think they're going to try to retain? What are your thoughts on that position?
Yeah, honestly, it's kind of by default. I have them keeping 9 guys, and maybe there's a Foxborough flu in here for somebody somewhere. But look, they're Andrews, right? Andrews, Brown, Andrews, Brown, Onwenu, Strange. Those are your 4 starters. You're going to keep McDermott and Reef because that's your starting and backup tackles. Now you're at 6 without any of the rookies. Jake Andrews, Antonio Mafi, Sidney So. You can't cut those guys. They're all top 150 picks. You can't burn those contracts. And that's 9. I'd love to keep Chase and Hines. I know that they're going to want to keep James Ferentz. I know they really like Cody Russi. I also left out Calvin Anderson because Bill did not sound optimistic about getting him back. But if Calvin Anderson comes back, I don't know, because they gave Riley Reef a lot of money. He's the 20th highest paid right tackle. He's a starting paid right tackle in the NFL. They've kind of just done this to themselves where they have a bunch of guys that aren't necessarily starters, but they can't cut. Again, I think a Foxborough flu is coming for somebody. But yeah, right now they have to keep 9 guys. There's really nobody in there you can cut unless Riley Reef becomes, totally takes off, or Connor McDermott totally takes off and Calvin Anderson comes back and you cut whichever right tackle doesn't take off. But Bill Murray will still be here on the practice squad. Cody Russi will still be here on the practice squad. James Ferentz will still be here on the practice squad. I'd love to see a way for them to keep Chase and Hines too, and Andrew Stuber. I like those guys, but now what am I at? 4 tight ends and 4 offensive linemen. That's half the practice squad.
The big boys.
So that's 8 plus I have 1 tight end is 9. I didn't keep any running backs or receivers. So I'm at 9 on the practice squad. I still have some room. We'll see. I didn't do the practice squad on my roster projections, so we're going to do this in real time. But yeah, I just, this one's actually kind of easy because there's so many guys they can't afford to cut that there's you get to that number. And even though there's other guys you want to keep, you're not keeping 10 linemen. You're not going to have 150 a roster being offensive linemen. So you go from there.
If Mike Nwenu ends up starting the season on PUP, now this would be a pretty dire situation for the Patriots as right tackle is already an issue. I've been saying 1 offensive line spot that's kind of a liability. You can get away with that. You can cover that up, especially with Bill O'Brien, an offensive coordinator of his caliber. If you also have a problem at right guard, that's a bigger issue. So if he does start on PUP, who do you think takes that spot? I've got Cody Russi personally because mostly he's been really involved with Mac Jones. It seems like he's a guy that they want in the rotation, even if Mafi ends up being the guy who plays. Do you think maybe that's James Ferentz? Who do you think benefits if they don't get Nwenu to start the season?
I think it's Antonio Mafi. He's been the best player of the group you named. I know he's not the most experienced, but he's looked really good over there at right guard. And it's you go from 9 roster spots to 8. It opens up a roster spot elsewhere. If Nwenu opens on PUP, I think that's just 1 less lineman they keep. Because again, they generally keep 7 or 8. I don't know if they're going to go out of their way to keep 9. So it's not. I'm not just saying Mafi's going to start because it makes the roster projection work. Like I think he's been the best guard, and he's a guy they worked with at the Shrine Bowl. They have a level of familiarity with him, with Adrian Clem's ties to the UCLA program. And obviously Chip Kelly is a guy who has a relationship with Bill Belichick. It's a team that generally doesn't trust rookies, but when they do, 1, they're usually on the offensive line, and 2, they're usually guys from certain programs they believe in. So I think that Mafi they'd at least give him a shot. Maybe he blows up, it's not working, and something gets changed in like late September where James Ferentz or Cody Russi's added to the roster, or maybe even one of those guys is elevated from the practice squad the first few weeks and they go back and forth and they continue that competition into the regular season. But I don't think that would lead to them keeping an extra lineman.
Okay, I actually like that a lot more. It makes some of these projections a lot easier. And with Mafi, when you talk to Adrian Clem, when you talk to Bill Belichick, even when I spoke to Mafi, well coached keeps coming up. They clearly have a lot of respect for his pedigree, and we've seen that that's translated on the field as him getting a lot of opportunities to show what he has at both guard spots.
Football season's about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. You can choose your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/Boston.
All right, Alex, now let's move on to the defensive line. Now here, you got Christian Barmore, Carl Davis, Devon Gottschall, Lawrence Guy, rookie Keon White, and Dietrich Wise. Now, I feel like most of those guys, people would agree with. Carl Davis is somebody that's a bit of a surprise because Daniel Ekuale is off. Now, we talked to our buddy Evan Lazar about this. He didn't think that Carl Davis was going to make the roster, and I'm a pretty big Daniel Ekuale guy. I had him on my projection, but you left him off. So what is it that Carl Davis brings that you think makes him a guy who's going to make the roster? And why'd you leave off my guy, Daniel Ekuale?
So honestly, there were so many guys, right, with that roster crunch at the beginning when we were doing the offense, and I kept talking about, you cut this guy and you bring him back after you put somebody on IR or whatever, or you keep him, you cut somebody else, you bring him back. So those players had to come eventually. I had Ekuale because I just, he's got 1 year left on his deal. He's got a PED suspension on his record. He's a guy I think you could cut and get back pretty easily. I feel the same way about Carl Davis. Honestly, between those two, it was a coin flip for me. Who was going to be the guy that was cut and brought back. I had Ekuale as my 54th player. I think I had Carl Davis as my 53rd player. It literally just came down to, when I wrote it on Friday, the past few days, I thought Carl Davis had, been a little bit better than Daniel Ekuale at camp. If you want to tell me you think it should be the other way around, honestly, I wouldn't disagree. Again, I think it's a coin flip there, but between those two guys, I think you're looking at players who could get cut and brought back while the rest of the roster gets shaken out.
I think that's pretty fair. And one guy I'm actually curious about, Jeremiah Farms. Now, he's a bit of an under-the-radar guy. I don't think a lot of fans maybe are familiar with. Not only does he play on the interior of the defensive line, we've also seen him in the past year, also at times last season, spend some time on the offensive line. Do you think he's somebody that could sneak onto the practice squad, or do you think he's maybe too much of a project considering all the other talented guys that they've got who could take those practice squad slots?
Yeah, I think he's absolutely a guy they'd keep because he can play both sides of the ball, kind of like Bill Murray-ish, just a guy that can do a lot for them in terms of practice. He's not going to make the team. Yeah, I don't think he's an NFL player, but he's the kind of guy they like to have around on the practice squad. So I had 4 tight ends, 4 offensive linemen, a quarterback, 8, 9. All right, so I'm at 10 practice squad spots. So I'll have to keep track of that.
You got 6 left. 6 left, brother. All right, linebackers. Now, straightforward one, Juwan Bentley, Chris Board, who's one of the rare specialists who also could have a bit of a significant role on defense. We'll see how that plays out, but he's definitely been in the mix. Anthony Jennings is a guy who I had trouble finding a spot for on my roster projection as hard as I tried, but I do see the value there, so I'm curious what you think on him. Matthew Judon, obviously, just got a pay bump. Marte Mapu, the linebacker, we know he's going to spend a pretty good amount of time in the defensive backfield. Jelani Tavai, guy who's been doing a lot better as a Patriot in the past. Last season, I thought he really took a step forward. He's looking good this year. Josh Uche, last year at his deal, the best pass rusher. And Mac Wilson, somebody that you said looks good in camp. I haven't particularly spotted him, although there was that play to, I think it was the crossing route to Mike Gesicki, where Mac was like a tick late, and Wilson made him pay with a really, really impressive pass breakup. He struggled with recognition last season, and I think that was a big reason he didn't really play on the defensive side of the ball, although he was a core special teamer. So what were your thoughts on that position and how that shook out for you?
Yeah, look, I know 8's a lot. And initially coming into camp, my 53rd spot was between Mac Wilson and Anthony Jennings, because Jennings, I know people aren't super high on him, but he played 35% of their defensive snaps last year. That's not nothing, and he continues to rep with the #1 team. So I had him over Mac Wilson, but I don't know. I think Mac Wilson's made a lot of plays in this camp, especially in coverage. And if Marte Mapu is going to be as important as we think he is, you'd better have good depth behind him. And Mac Wilson is the closest guy to that skill set. He's not a 1-for-1. Nobody's going to be. It's part of the reason Marte Mapu is so exciting. But so, yeah, I have 8 linebackers. I know that number's a lot. Now, it's kind of inflated because, like you said, Marte Mapu is multi-positional, and Chris Board, you could probably list with the special teamers. I list him with the linebacker because I think he'll play enough on defense to justify that. I've kind of, people ask me, well, who is this guy really? Is he a special teamer? Is he, is he going to play? What is he? I've kind of said he's like the defensive version of Brandon Bolden, right? Brandon Bolden was a special teamer, but he wasn't Matthew Slater. He'd give you snaps at running back. If you need him to play running back, he'd give you 100, 150 snaps a year. So I think that's Chris Board's role. He's kind of that second downhill linebacker behind Juwan Bentley, so they can keep Tavai on the edge. And then, he'll play a key role on special teams as well. But, it's inside and outside linebacker. Sure, I know it's a lot, but they got a lot of talent there, and there's not a ton of overlap in terms of the skill sets. You have a lot of guys that bring a lot of different things to the table, and I think this defense wants to be as multiple as it can be. So that's a spot where you got to keep a lot of players.
That's totally fair. And Mack Wilson, I trust your eye. I've been kind of paying more attention to the receivers in the secondary because I feel like they're the talk of the town right now. So Mack Wilson, like to see that he's making some strides his second year in the system. Another guy I want to bring up, kind of like we talked about Jeremiah Farms, kind of an under-the-radar guy most fans aren't familiar with, but could have a role on the team on the practice squad, Calvin Munson. He's a guy that we've seen take reps with guys who were projected to be starters on defense at times. Not a ton, but enough that you're like, okay, I wasn't expecting this from a Calvin Munson. Also seems to be a guy who's getting a lot of reps with the core special teamers. I don't think he's going to make the roster, but because he's more of that downhill guy like a Juwan Bentley or a Jelani Tavai, it seems like he could have a role as a guy where certain game plans, they elevate him potentially. What do you think about his, chance at making the team either on the roster or on the practice squad?
Yeah, so I think they like Munson, and I think this is his third stint. I know it's definitely his second. It might be his third.
So, yeah.
He can do some of that downhill linebacker stuff. We've even seen him rep a little bit on the edge with that first team, so they really like him. He's a guy you can get on the practice squad. He's not going to get claimed. He's a guy that it is a very specific fit for them. Maybe he gets elevated down the road if they need to kind of change things up on special teams or if they do need another linebacker. But we'll call that my 11th practice squad spot. I just they have too much talent at linebacker for him to get on the 53.
Yeah, a lot of diverse talent there. And, he does kind of overlap, so it makes a lot of sense. All right, now cornerback. Like I said, a position I've personally been paying a lot of attention to because I feel like it's just a sexy position as well on the defensive side of the ball. Miles Bryant, underappreciated. I think he's a guy who's really growing as a leader on the team. Obviously, you do not want him in man coverage situations. I think that's fair. The criticism in that area of his game is warranted, but I think his intelligence, his physicality, and his ability to read plays its own coverage, which is where I think he thrives, is very underrated. He's a versatile player, allows him to do a lot of different things in the secondary. Christian Gonzalez you've got as well. Jack Jones. Now, he's an interesting case we can get into. Jonathan Jones and Marcus Jones, I think they're pretty straightforward. Like I said, Jack Jones, with his legal situation, we're not sure if he's actually going to be on the roster for week 1 or the entire season. So in the event that he isn't on the team, who do you think benefits the most? Obviously, Isaiah Bolden and Amir Speed aren't on this projection, but they're two guys obviously selected in this year's draft who do have potential, although in different roles.
I think it's Isaiah Bolden and you just kind of hit on it. I think Amir Speed maybe has a little more special teams upside, but I think they like Isaiah Bolden potentially as like a long-term cornerback. And even if the plan would be to cut him and bring him back, you don't want to burn his rookie contract. If you're going to start playing him as a boundary corner, people forget this. When you cut a guy, even if you bring him back, you don't bring him back on his rookie deal. You have to sign a new contract. The rookie deal has been voided. Yeah. Do you really want to be going year to year with like your potential third boundary corner? You don't. Not at that age. So I had Isaiah Bolden off. I had him as my 55th player after Daniel Aquali, who I already explained that situation. I think they're going to figure out a way to get him on the team. I just couldn't do it. And that's why they're paid to do that. I'm paid to do this. But he's shown a lot of promise at corner. They need a really good insurance plan for Jack Jones. It's just the reality of it, whether it's this year, whether it's down the line. They need that. I don't think they want to play Jonathan Jones and Marcus Jones on the boundary as much as they have in the past. I really like Isaiah Bolden's prospects to make the team. Amir Speed brings some ability on special teams, and he's another one of these big athletic guys like Bolden, but I've just seen more from Bolden as a corner that if I had, they're not going to be able to keep both. And I know, maybe some people think I sound hypocritical. Well, you're burning Amir Speed's contract just like you're burning Isaiah Bolden's contract if you cut him. If I have to pick one, I'm picking Bolden. I think Bolden has more long-term upside at the cornerback position, and I'll go year to year with the special teams guy in Amir Speed. I don't want to go year to year with the potential starting corner.
I think that's fair. And Bolden has given up a lot of receptions. Like, he's not getting burned or anything. It's not like, all right, this guy doesn't belong on an NFL field, but you'd like to see him finish more. That said, the athletic profile, the versatility. In college, he played all over the secondary. And he's got a lot of experience. I think he led the Tigers last year in defensive snaps played, which is still valuable. He's seen a lot of action. So I agree. I don't know how to fit Bolden on my projection either, but I think he's someone I agree with his skill set and with what he brings on defense, not just as a kick returner as well, was arguably the best kick returner in the country last year. He's someone you'd like to keep around. Now it's safety. We got somebody who, similar to Isaiah Bolden, I didn't know how to keep him on my roster, and Joshua Bledsoe. Now I know the team likes him. He's been in the rotation with guys you expect to have a big role in the defense. It's just that he doesn't play a lot of special teams necessarily from what we've just seen in his career. That could also be, whether he's active, whether he's inactive. And then behind him, you've got Kyle Duggar, Jalen Mills, Jabril Peppers, Adrian Phillips. Really the guys you expect are pretty much going to be locks. So let's get a bit more into Joshua Bledsoe. What have you seen from him and why he's going to crack the 53?
I just think that's a guy they like. They don't cut players like Joshua Bledsoe. He's a smart football player. He's a physical football player. And look, he made the roster last year. I think that's surprising people, but he made the roster last year and he hasn't looked worse. So I think if he made it last year, the circumstances are similar. I think he'll be back on. I think he'll probably have a bigger special teams role this year. But I just, guys that rep with the ones generally make the team. And he's been repping with the ones. So I'm inclined to believe that they're in the thought process currently that they're going to keep him.
Yeah, fair enough. And especially at that position, you got some older guys. Hopefully, I think we're in the same boat here. Hopefully they re-sign Kyle Duggar and he's not going anywhere anytime soon, obviously. But Jalen Mills, he's on a 1-year deal, kind of is that tight end eraser is what he's projected to be. Obviously, he's got a background as a corner, but in that big nickel slot role, it seems like Bledsoe's a pretty good fit there. So yeah, I think it's a pretty good idea to keep him around, keep some youth at the position. All right, defense cleared. Now we're moving on to special teams. Now this one, we've got some battles, but you've got rookies winning out. For kicker, Chad Ryland, punter, Bryce Behringer, and then the veteran who we all know and love, Joe Cardona. Why do you think Nick Folk and Corliss Waitman aren't going to make the 53? And how do you see it playing out? Are they going to get on the practice squad, or the Patriots maybe going to try to get compensation for one of those guys? How's that going to play out?
So so Amir Speed was my 12th practice squad player. Corliss Waitman will be my 13th. This one's easier. Bryce Behringer's been the better punter. I think they keep Waitman, and Marcus Jones kind of talked about this today. Behringer's a right-footed punter. You have Waitman, who's a left-footed punter. You can prepare for both looks. And in case something happens with the rookie, you have somebody in the building already. As for the kickers, I actually think they would, in a perfect world, they'd like to keep both. I know some people have floated that, and it's kind of been poo-pooed as it's kind of college nonsense. I think they want to do it. I think they would love to have Nick Folk as their short distance kicker and Chad Ryland as their long distance kicker. Their roster doesn't support being able to do that. I think they're ultimately going to come to find that. And when it comes to picking Ryland over Folk, one, he was a 4th round pick. You're not going to cut bait with a 4th round pick. We talked about that with the offensive lineman. 2, they have that mantra of move on from a player a year too early as opposed to a year too late. Nick Folk's 38 years old. He had a rough second half of last season. I don't know how you look at that and say we're going to move on from this promising rookie. Now, could they keep Nick Folk on the practice squad? Maybe. At 38 years old, he's clearly comfortable in New England. And so he lives in Dallas. He commutes, not every day, but, he goes back and forth during the season. Between his kids are in school in Dallas. He goes back and forth between home and Dallas and here. And he keeps coming back. So he clearly has found some sort of comfortable routine and rhythm with that. And he clearly doesn't mind it. Is he going to go all the way to Seattle? Is he going to go to New York? Is he going to go to Southern California? Well, he is from Southern California, so that one's maybe different. But I don't think he's going to go anywhere. Yeah. But I don't know if you've seen what's going on in Dallas Cowboys training camp. They have their only kicker right now is an MLS player who's never played football. So they're in trouble.
That's desperate. That's desperation.
If he has a chance to go to Dallas, get on the 53-man roster, make more money than he would on the Patriots practice squad, play for objectively a better team, and live at home and not have to commute, halfway across the country, I wouldn't. I don't think you would. I wouldn't blame him. I don't think anybody would blame him for going off the Patriots practice squad for that setup. So and maybe I think the Texans have talked about needing a kicker. I think the Saints might be in the market for a kicker. So there's some areas that are at least closer to Dallas. And again, if one of the LA teams needs a kicker, he's from LA. I think he still has family in LA. I grew up in LA, so maybe that's an option. But yeah, like Seattle, that's a tough commute. Is he going to do that? Is he going to learn that from square one? I don't know. But it would be tough to get him on the practice squad. You're really going to have to sell him on that one, especially if Dallas comes calling. Now, I don't think they need him on the practice squad. I think between Ryland and Behringer, they have enough, and Ryland's been good enough on kickoffs that they're covered there. Behringer can hold, they're set. But Yeah, I just think that it's a logical. Nick Folk's been great for them. He's been excellent, but that year too early versus that year too late thing, 38 fell off at the end of last year. The last thing you want is to get to the middle of the year and realize you don't have a kicker. You don't want to go into that kicker carousel in the middle of the season. I don't think people realize how rare it was for the Patriots to find Folk the way he did. And people conveniently forget that Mike Nugent was a disaster for like 3 or 4 weeks before they then flipped back to Folk. So, Nick Folk's been a great Patriot, and I've loved covering him. Like, personally, he's a very fascinating guy to talk to. Obviously been a tremendous kicker here. Thanks for the time, but this is just a very logical spot to part ways for the Patriots and Nick Folk.
So is he not taking up one of your practice squad spots? You leaving it open?
I don't see how, like, I'd offer it to him. I don't see how Dallas doesn't call him and say, hey, we'll give you, a real NFL salary to come be our kicker. Because he's still one of the 32 best kickers in the league at the start of the season. So I'd give it to him. And look, I have 3 left, right? I was at 13.
Yes,
they're going to need to sign a running back. So call that 14. I'd offer it to him. I don't think he'd take it. I don't know why he would. And again, I think Dallas would just call him, and they're probably chomping at the bit, waiting. Frankly, if I'm the Patriots, before I cut him, I would call Dallas and see if I get a pick for him. That's really what because you're not going to get anything. You're not going to get a top 100 pick. But you can get a 6th-round pick for Nick Folk, a 7th-round pick for Nick Folk. Team that's supposed to have playoff hopes that doesn't have a kicker. Yeah. I don't think that's a ludicrous take, a ludicrous outcome.
Patriots like their late round trade chips. Nick Folk gets to go home, be closer to his family. I'd say that's a win-win all around.
Yeah.
All right. Now, last but certainly not least, we've got our specialists. Now, you've got Jordan Heelig. I tried so hard. Again, I feel like this is just the story of the defense. I had a lot of trouble finding room for a lot of these defenders. You've got Jordan Heelig on, the undrafted free agent. It was tough trying to find a spot because I see him as more the heir apparent to Matthew Slater. Maybe not immediately because obviously he spends a lot of time with him, kind of like Brendan Schooler did last year. We've seen what Brendan Schooler did. He's also on your projection. Matthew Slater, obviously, and DeMarcus Mitchell, another guy who's kind of a rare athlete in the Keon White mold, where he's a bigger dude who you wouldn't expect to be as fast as he is and can actually run downfield and make plays. He was an impact guy for them, kind of an under-the-radar player where, again, most fans may not know who he is, but he's got a role on this team. What did you see from Jordan Heelig that you said, yeah, he's somebody that got to find room for him?
Honestly, that UDFA streak. Well, so first off, I think he's going to make the team. Like, the guys that work one-on-one with Slater and Accord, especially as much as Heelig has, those guys generally end up making the roster. So I first and foremost, I want to be right. He's a guy I think that's going to be on the team. The other thing is they value that UDFA streak, and we're talking about the 20th year in a row here, and they kind of played with the wording a little bit to continue it, and JJ Taylor in 2020 and all that. But no, they've had a UDFA on their week 1 roster every year for the last 19 years, and that's important to them, and it matters. And I know people roll their eyes at that, but they care about that, and it's useful to them because they use that as a recruiting tool essentially when talking to UDFAs. I remember as a rookie, Jacoby Myers told us that was a big part of the reason he signed here, was he knew that he was going to be given a legitimate chance to make the team and not just be seen as a camp body. And wouldn't you know it, he made the team and ended up being a pretty damn good NFL player. So I think that streak means a lot to them. And I don't know, after Heelig, like, it's tough. Maybe Johnny Lumpkin makes it, but again, he's a guy who can get to the practice squad, elevate. I think they're good there. I don't know if they need to carry the 3rd tight end. I'm trying, like, Justice Tavai, they've got plenty of depth on the defensive line. I don't think he's going to make it. Tyrick Pitts isn't going to make the team. I'm missing somebody, and I have no idea who I'm missing, but I know I'm missing one guy. But yeah, none of those guys are going to make the team. So I honestly, I feel that the streak is as in jeopardy this year as it's been in a long time. But like, if it didn't extend this year, it wouldn't be the most surprising thing to me. But I do think they want to extend it, and Jordan Heelig is the most logical player to do that. Oh, the other guy's Malik Cunningham. Duh.
Right.
Who's going to be on the practice squad. He's not going to make the team.
Right. Well, Alex, you make me smarter every day. This was no different. I really appreciate the time, bud. Right now, the floor is yours. Anything you'd like to plug, fire away.
Yeah, so obviously 985thesportshub.com, all my content up there. Catch 22 podcast with Evan Lazar, mostly every Thursday, or actually Wednesday this week. So, because obviously there's the game going on Thursday, but that's on Patriots.com. The Patriots Beat podcast with Brian Hines on CLNS Media, right here on the CLNS Media YouTube channel. And for the rest of it, follow me on Twitter at @RealAlexBarth.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate your time so much. Thank you all for watching. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time.